Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. Today I'm going to walk you through Dune Imperium, the Bloodlines expansion. First up, this expansion comes with 9 additional leaders. This is absolutely fantastic, especially if you are into Dune Imperium. It's nice to have a lot of different diversity when it comes to playing of heroes and playing of leaders. It really changes how the game feels every time that you play it. So adding 9 additional leaders to the set feels really good. The other cool thing about it is that they vary in difficulty. So on top of these cards, there's a difficulty sort of setting on each of these, and it ranges anywhere from 1 to 3. So if you're kind of newer to the game, it's still nice because you can use some of the easier leaders. If you are more into the game, you want a little bit of a bigger challenge while you play, they obviously have some more complex leaders. Next up, we're going to talk about tech tiles. So what's kind of interesting is that this expansion comes with an additional set of tech tiles, and there's quite a few of them. I believe there's 18 in total that come with this expansion. Now, here's kind of where things get a little bit complicated, a little bit complex. So obviously we have the Rise of Ix expansion board that we see on the left-hand side of the screen. So the Bloodlines expansion comes with the smaller board on the right-hand side of the screen. Now it's kind of up to you as the player on what sort of level of complexity you want to have as part of your game. So you can use one of these tiles, but not both of these. So you can either favor using the tactile sort of overlay from the Rise of Ix expansion, or you could use the new one from Bloodlines, but you don't want to be using both. So kind of what I recommend, and this is just me having played Dune Imperium for such a long time, if you have the Rise of Ix expansion, I would go ahead and just simply use the Rise of Ix overlay, and then you just put the cards in equal piles in the draw piles over here on the side. In addition to that, you're going to have one of these Sardaukar commanders that is going to be sitting on the Dreadnought spot location. On the setup, I'll go ahead and talk about these things a little bit later on in the game. So kind of what we're looking at is that the game's going to function fairly normally if you have the Rise of Ix expansion. If you don't have the Rise of Ix expansion or prefer the Bloodlines style of play, this is going to be just a little bit different, so I'm going to take some time to go over that. So I'm going to go ahead and focus in on sort of the top of this tech tree tile. What you're going to see is that anytime you go to a green space, it's going to allow you to purchase any one of the tech tiles, and those are just going to be sitting, obviously like face up in these piles on top of the card. And this is going to be pretty similar to what we've seen in the past with some of these expansions. So you're going to have, a total of 3 of these technologies sitting face up. So anytime you send an agent to a green location, that allows you to purchase one of these tiles for the amount of spice that's actually listed on them. What's kind of interesting in the Bloodlines only sort of expansion, if you're playing that with Dune Imperium, if you have a seat at the High Council, and that's kind of what this text says at the top. Let's see if I can zoom in on that. It says if you have a High Council seat, tech tiles are going to cost 1 less spice. So this kind of incentivizes you to get a seat on the High Council. That's going to help you obviously buy cards, but it's going to give you a secondary bonus of decreasing the cost of the tech tiles. Now please note, this is only if you're using this Bloodlines overlay. If you're using the normal sort of Rise of Ix overlay, this rule doesn't apply. So sort of the complexity level is deciding what you want to do as a player and what the other players at the table want to do while you're playing this expansion. With so many expansions, it gives you a lot of opportunities now to pick and mix and match different rules. As a final note, if you are using the Rise of Ix expansion with Bloodlines, you're going to place a second Sardaukar commander on tech negotiations if you are playing a 4-player game. Next, we're going to talk about the addition of the Sardaukar commanders in Dune Imperium, and these are going to be represented by either these white plastic pieces, or there are black cubes that also come in the box, and it just kind of depends on what you prefer to do. If you have some of the plastic pieces, you can mix and match them with that. If you are using the square cubes, you can go ahead and use those as well. What you're going to do at the start of the game is you're going to take the pile of tiles. There are, I believe, 14 of these tiles. You're going to go ahead and shuffle them and put 4 of them face up on the play area, wherever it is you're going to have those on the table. Next up, the rules goes through kind of where you place all of the different commanders and their locations. I went ahead and just used the same sort of Rise of Ix expansion board. I think a lot of players like Rise of Ix, and I can foresee a lot of players actually using Rise of Ix with this expansion. So the first thing that you're going to notice is that these skills are going to be kind of different, okay? So you're going to see replicates of those in the draw deck themselves. So as an example, you have Canny that's showing up, and all of these different, Hardy, there's a second copy of that. So you're going to see replicates of these. Driven, here's another one. And what that means is that there is some versatility in what's actually in this pile. When you're playing this, you can't have the same skill twice. So that's kind of like the first rule, is that once you start acquiring these Sardaukar commander skills, you can only have one of each type. So don't ever get a second one from that. So that's just one of the basic rules. Secondarily, how you get these commanders is pretty simple. They're going to be placed all out on the game board at different locations. When you take your agent and you go to a corresponding spot, you can optionally, if you want, spend 2 Solari. So I've got the 2 Solari in my hand here to take this piece off the board, and then this is going to be your commander. When you do take that, you get to take one of the face-up sort of Sardaukar commander skills, and so you go ahead and just take one of these, move it off to the side, then you're going to go to the draw pile and flip another one over. So that's kind of the basics of how you acquire one of the commanders. Next, I'm going to go into how you actually use them. Now I'm going to walk you through how to use the Sardaukar commander. So what I'm putting out onto the screen, on the left-hand side I have a green troop, and then I have a Sardaukar commander on the right-hand side. Please notice that they're roughly the same size. So that is going to give you a quick tip that in the combat arena, when they are in the conflict, they are going to be the same amount of strength. So whether you have a troop or a commander, they're going to be worth 2 strength in the conflict. So think of it this way: when they're out on the board, they're going to be identical. So now we're going to bounce back and understand what happens when you gain one of these. So as an example, when you send something to a board space, so as an example, we have a Sardaukar commander up here. Maybe you send your agent here. You're going to go ahead and pay the 2 Solari cost. You're going to grab this commander here, and then you're going to grab a corresponding skill card, and then this kind of goes off to the side. Now, when you get that commander, it's going to go one of 2 places. So if I went to a non-combat space, so as an example, this is a non-combat oriented space, whereas the one above it is. If I have recruited the commander from a non-combat oriented space, it's going to be dropped into my garrison with my other soldiers that are in my garrison. If, for instance, you hire a Sardaukar commander from a combat location, so it would be something like this with the crossed swords, you can alternatively take the commander and then place it directly into the conflict. So anytime you can place a troop into the conflict, you can alternatively place a commander into the conflict instead. Something pretty amazing is going to happen if you have a commander in the conflict. So you get to activate all of your commander skills independent of how many commanders you actually have in the conflict. So in this case, we have 1 commander in the conflict, but the green player has 2 of these commander skills that they've acquired over the course of the game. So simply by putting 1 commander into the conflict, it makes both of these skills active. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of zoom in on that. So you notice that these are pretty easy to understand. During your reveal turn, you're going to get some additional resources, so thus you can buy cards that are a little bit better. You have a little bit more buying power to get extra cards into your deck, and then on the right-hand side, you can get a troop. So this is a kind of a cool concept, is that whenever these commanders come out, you get to execute all of these different skills. Now, what I mentioned before is that you can't have a duplicate of the same skill. So as an example, we couldn't have two of the charismatic styles of skills. So this kind of gets you to, mix and match. You get a bunch of different skills going on. So it's pretty exciting once you put one of these commanders actually into the conflict. Now, what happens at the end of the turn when you're cleaning up the board is that obviously your troops go back to your supply. So this is going to bounce back to your supply. Now this commander is kind of like a troop, so it's also going to bounce back to your supply. So you're going to put it sort of off to the side, and it's going to sit in your supply until you kind of do another recruitment action. So what you can do, and this can be part of your agent or your reveal sort of term. So as an example, maybe I've got my green agent, and then on a future turn, I take it and I put it down onto secrets. If I wanted to, I can take 2 Solari during any of my agent phases and pay to really bring that commander back, and then it can go back into my garrison. So think of it as you're going to have to need a lot of Solari if you're playing the Sardaukar commanders. Now, if you played a lot of Dune Imperium, and this happens in quite a few of the games, toward the middle or the end of the game, it's not uncommon for you to have a decent amount of Solari, and you don't have a lot to really spend it on. And so after you get your secondary agent or you've gone to the High Council, sometimes you just have a bunch of Solari sitting around and you can't really do anything with it. So what I do like about what the game designers did is they gave you another avenue for spending your Solari, and then you also get to, get these special ability cards that can trigger over and over again over the course of the game. So when you take everything that's kind of in the game and you think about, hey, I can have troops, I can have dreadnoughts, I can have sandworms, now I can have these commanders as well. It gives you a lot of different options for combat, and it also gives you some cool different synergies that you can play with by putting out these Sardaukar commander skills. So overall, I really like what they did with this mechanic. Plus, it helps you burn that sort of useless Solari that piles up in your supply toward the middle or the end of the game. As with every other Dune Imperium expansion, it's not uncommon for additional types of cards to be added. As an example, there's a pretty hefty amount of cards added to the draw deck. You also have a pretty decent pile of intrigue cards that have been added. There's a couple conflict cards that have been added. And then you also have a bunch of extra contract tiles that came with the game. So this is just going to add additional options into the game and just add to the sort of random feel and really make every game of Dune Imperium feel unique. Obviously, when you add the 9 additional leaders with all of this additional content, really you're going to have a unique experience every time you play. So this is another cool addition to the game. Dune Bloodlines makes a modification to the spy mechanic. So as an example, if we have this post where a spy can be added to, let's say the red player has a spy sitting on it. What that means is that traditionally in the game, you can't place a second spy because that position is actually blocked. Bloodlines adds sort of a new mechanic in where you can put a spy in with deep cover onto the board. So as an example, I'm going to take a look at this card. Please notice that this is a new icon. It has a sort of gray looking spy and then a gold looking spy. What this means is that you can put a spy into deep cover, which means that you can ignore the deployment restriction and actually place 2 spies at the same post. It's kind of a new mechanic. I don't think it's that difficult to understand, and it's probably very situational. So very rarely, would you want to maybe contest one of these locations. Probably the biggest one, in my opinion, would be the Highliner. Obviously, this is a really impactful spot on the game board. You can gain a massive amount of troops, and you can drop them into the conflict. So, for me, that would be a pretty normal and natural place to put a spy into deep cover, and I think that would be an advantage. Next up, I'm going to try to zoom in on the bottom of this card, and notice it says command, and there's a 6+ listed. I'll try to zoom in a little bit deeper so you can see that. Basically, what that means is that if you have 6 persuasion or higher, when you go to your reveal phase, it can trigger this additional action, which means that you can place additional troops into the conflict. So think of this as a surprise. So really what I'm trying to focus on is the command sort of function. So saying, hey, if I have 6 plus persuasion, I get to do something additionally. And then this is just an icon. I think this occurred in one of the previous expansions. So as a different sort of example, we can see this command card and it says, hey, if I've got 6 persuasion or more, I can pay 3, or I get 3 Solari and trash this card. So that's a good way that you can kind of change things up, and it incentivizes you for having a high amount of persuasion. The cool thing is you don't have to spend the persuasion to activate the event. You just simply have to have it, and you get something additional from it. To summarize, Dune Imperium Bloodlines keeps the franchise moving forward by adding a host of new game mechanics. If you are a veteran player to Dune Imperium, I really don't think the rule changes are going to be that complex and that confusing that you're really going to struggle with the new mechanics. I think it keeps things fresh. So you obviously have additional leaders. For me, that was very impactful because I think it's fun to play different leaders. So that allows me numerous games where I can use a new leader and sort of experience a different playstyle. Also with the addition of, cards for the Imperium row, different intrigue cards, there's some new conflicts. You also have the concept of the Sardaukar commanders, and you also have additional ways that you can buy tech tiles, which I think is really interesting for the game itself. So all in all, if you're a veteran player, I think this is a natural sort of expansion for you to purchase. If you are a new player to Dune Imperium, this is something that I recommend. Just buy one of the 2 different base games and then start experiencing that game and then slowly move on and add one expansion at a time. It's going to be sort of a fun progression, and it's not going to be completely overwhelming. If you're a brand new player and you buy one of the 2 base games and then jump in and buy a bunch of expansions at the same time and try to sit down and play at the table, I think that would be kind of confusing, and I think it would be tough for you to immediately jump into the game. So 2 different play styles. We got veteran players and we got new players. Bloodlines is a great way to experience the game, and I highly recommend playing it. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.